What is up, guys? It is Iron Fist here. We're back at it again with another episode in our What If series. And as you can see in the video title, today's episode is about Le'Veon Bell. Now, as I do in all these, before we get into actually what this video is about, we go all the way back to the beginning, back to their college days. Le'Veon Bell spent his college years playing for Michigan State University. He played 3 seasons there before he went off to the NFL. His collective stats there, rushing, he had 671 attempts, 3,346 rushing yards, averaged 5 yards a carry, and had 33 touchdowns. In his receiving, he was able to rack up 78 receptions, 531 yards. He averaged 6.8 yards per catch, and had 1 touchdown, which gave him his total stats for his college career at 3,877 total yards and 34 total touchdowns. Le'Veon Bell was then drafted in the 2013 NFL Draft, round 2, pick 48 overall by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, before we actually get into what the video is about, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of a context as to what he's done in his career for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Le'Veon Bell played in 5 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers for a total of 62 games. And in those seasons, he was able to rack up 3 Pro Bowls and 2 first-team All-Pros. Now, for his overall stats in those 5 seasons, he had 1,229 rushing attempts for a total of 5,336 rushing yards. He averaged 4.3 yards per carry and had a total of 35 touchdowns. He was also able to rack up some impressive stats on the receiving side as well. He had 312 receptions for a total of 2,660 yards. He averaged 8.5 yards per catch and had a total of 7 touchdowns. This brought his total career stats with the Pittsburgh Steelers at 7,996 yards when you combine his rushing and his receiving, and a total of 42 touchdowns. Overall, his tenure with Pittsburgh is what led most people to believe he is absolutely in the conversation for one of the top 3 running backs in the league. Some people have him 1, some have him 2, some have him 3, but overall, he's right there in just about everybody's opinion. Now, here's where the problem came in. In 2017, the Steelers, instead of giving him a contract, decided to go ahead and hit him with the franchise tag. And if you're not familiar with what a franchise tag is, what it does is it allows the team to give you basically a 1-year contract and not allow you to go to free agency, and they can keep you for that year. The problem with franchise tags on the team side is every year that you use one on the same player, the amount you have to pay them goes up and up and up, and it increased dramatically, so it eventually gets way too expensive to make sense. Le'Veon Bell was not happy with this and wanted a long-term contract because the life of a running back in the NFL is not always the longest, and you absolutely want to capitalize in your prime as much money as you can possibly get before you end up having to retire. So in response to getting franchise tagged, he sat out all training camp and preseason hoping that they would find an agreement for a contract. But ultimately they did not. He signed the franchise tag and showed up just in time to start the season. And although he sat out, he still ended up making the Pro Bowl that year. He had 321 rushing attempts, 1,291 rushing yards. He averaged 4 yards a carry and had 9 touchdowns. Now on the receiving side, he had 85 catches for 655 yards, averaged 7.7 yards a catch with another 2 touchdowns. Overall, is a pretty impressive season for having sit out all of training camp and the preseason, shutting down any questions as to whether they should give him a long-term contract or not. And here's where the real problem came in. In 2018, instead of giving him a long-term deal, the Steelers once again used the franchise tag on him. Now, a lot of people scrutinized him for not signing this because he would have been the highest paid running back that season. The problem with that is that most people didn't want to look at was he's wanting long-term money, something guaranteed as opposed to a 1-year thing, and if he gets hurt, who knows, he could be done. Whereas all the contracts that are getting signed now, the biggest thing that is emphasized is guaranteed money. So whether you get injured or don't perform or they cut you, that money is still yours to keep regardless of the situation. Le'Veon Bell thought he proved a big enough point last year by sitting out all the way until the start of the season and then still going out and performing great, and apparently he did not because the Steelers still didn't want to sign him to a long-term deal, so Le'Veon Bell decided to sit out the entire 2018 season. All year long, all the way up to the deadline that he was given, people were wondering when he was going to show up, if he was going to show up at all. There's tons of reports that he was going to, but I don't think any of these were actually accurate because he ended up not showing up at all, and for those of you that drafted him in fantasy like I did, it was kind of a bummer. That being said, he was heavily criticized for this decision. I personally am on Le'Veon's side for this. On one hand, I completely understand the fact that he's throwing away, I think it was $14.5 million, but at the same time, he's wanting more long-term money regardless of what ends up happening because of the shelf life of a running back not being that long, and the pool of talent is pretty large too. But Le'Veon Bell is kind of a once-in-a-generation kind of player, and there's very few of them in the league right now. So I personally think it was understandable for him to just want some appreciation shown by a long-term contract by the team that he had given his all for 5 years. There are a few blemishes on his career from suspensions, but all in all, he has outperformed any other option they could have ever had. Which all in all led to this year, 2019, where he ultimately did not sign with the Steelers and entered free agency, hoping he could find a long-term contract elsewhere. That long-term contract did show up in the form with the New York Jets of a 4-year, $52.5 million contract with $61 million max with incentives and $35 million guaranteed. Now, you could argue you could add $14.5 million to that had he actually played last year, but that's also assuming he would have A, absolutely killed it and still been over the top good, and B, didn't get hurt at all and would have ended up getting a contract like this anyway. That's a very big assumption and one I personally do not agree with. Some people think Le'Veon Bell hurt himself by sitting out last year. I think ultimately it depends on what you're viewing. If it's strictly about money, and I completely understand that argument as well, yes, he did miss out on all that money last year, and there's a very good chance that he would have been okay and still would have came around to get this contract as well, and maybe even more money on this contract, but at the same time, that's a very risky game playing, assuming he wouldn't have gotten hurt and then never got anything else after that. But on the other side of the argument, the happiness side, I personally think he'll ultimately be a lot happier now that he's out of that headache of a situation and can actually go back to playing football, not have to worry about any kind of contract negotiations, at least for another 4 years, and just get out there and do what he does best, which is absolutely dominate the running game. Also, shout out to Clutch Points for this photo. This is absolutely the best one I could find with him in a Jets uniform. Now, with all that being said, that leads us back to what this video is actually about. What if Le'Veon Bell never sat out? Now, before we get into Madden, let's have a little bit of a discussion as to how the Steelers season went last year. The Steelers finished the year going 9-6-1 and spent their very last game staying and watching the Browns versus the Ravens in hopes that the Ravens would lose and send the Steelers to the playoffs. Unfortunately, that did not happen for them, and they ended up going home and missing the playoffs. It's also worth noting that Le'Veon Bell's backup, James Conner, absolutely had a fantastic season, and one that a lot of people argued was better than what Le'Veon Bell would have done. I personally think that's a bit of a ridiculous argument. James Conner is a fantastic running back, but he is not Le'Veon Bell. Now, that's not an argument Steelers fans want to hear, and I completely understand that, and you shouldn't agree with it because you should support the guy that you have from here on out. But anybody else on the outside looking in, Le'Veon Bell is just another level of talent, but James Conner is absolutely not a disappointing replacement. Alright, now here's where we take it over to Madden. We were at the start of the season last year, and we are going to assume that Le'Veon Bell stayed and actually participated, and you still have James Conner on the team. Antonio Brown is still here as well, and then Juju also took off like he had. This is an updated roster. It just keeps Le'Veon Bell on it. Alright, so now let's go over here. We are going to simulate the entire season and see what would have changed had Le'Veon Bell actually participated, according to Madden. Alright, so here we are now that the season has been simulated to the playoffs, and believe it or not, it has them finishing with the exact same record. Now, whether you agree or disagree with that, let's go ahead and take a look and see how everything broke down in the AFC. So it had Texans going 13-3, Ravens going 12-4, so they didn't win the division. Ravens still won the division, but Ravens had a little bit better year than what they thought. But this is also simulating probably using Lamar Jackson the entire season, which some argued should have happened from the start anyway. Jaguars 11-5, Jets 10-6, Steelers 9-6, and it's got the Patriots all the way down here at 9-7. So as you can see, this probably isn't the most accurate of simulations, which nobody really expects it to, considering it is Madden. It's just a fun way for us to play the scenario out. Now where the interesting part comes in, let's go ahead and take a look and see what kind of season Le'Veon Bell had. So here we can see Le'Veon Bell had 215 carries for 1,020 yards, 4.7 average yards per carry, and 7 touchdowns. He was also able to add 9 catches for 184 yards with 2 receiving touchdowns. And we all know that's not very accurate because they use Le'Veon Bell like a receiver, which is part of why he was disputing so much the amount he was paid, because he felt he was worth essentially 2 players. So now we're going to go ahead and simulate to the Super Bowl and see who ends up winning out. So here we are after simulated all the way to the Super Bowl. It had the Steelers beating the Jets 45-7 in the wild card round, but it did have them losing to the Texans 18-21 in the divisional round. And for those of you that are curious as to how it played out, it has the Ravens versus the Rams in the Super Bowl. So all in all, I don't think I particularly agree with how the simulation ended up. I do think they would have done a little bit better, My personal opinion, I think they would have been in the argument with the Patriots and the Chiefs just because of how offensively powered they were, but they had a lot of distractions off the field, so who knows how that would have played an effect in the playoffs and throughout the season. They could have actually ended up having a worse year because of all the back and forth. Ultimately, that's for you guys to discuss and talk about. I want to hear your guys' opinions, and let me know what if scenario you would like me to do next. Ultimately, I think Le'Veon Bell is going to be a lot happier in New York, not having to worry about all this contract fiasco going on. And I think 2019-2020 could be a very big season for him. Let me know your all's thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.